right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I am Mother Marcella Drawdy from, I'm a curate here. I've been here almost 2 years now, and I've told, I've told my story a couple of times, but haven't told a lot of folks who have not been here, who are usually come on Sunday but don't come to the luncheons and the breakfast. So you'll hear me today, and then Mother Amy will speak next Sunday. So, okay. So we all have stories, and they're all complicated in one way or another. So how does a person make sense of things that happen in our lives? Philosophers, historians do this with world events, social movements. Biographers tend to write about people of great influence in our world, but usually not about just ordinary folks. So that's kind of up to you to write your own story so that you can pass on the information to others. I highly recommend you do that type of thing for your family, especially your children and your grandchildren, so that they know where you come from, which is really important. So my story was a spiritual, or the writing of my story was a spiritual practice of meaning making, because when you go into the priesthood, you have to kind of thread things together about where your encounters where God was, and you get pretty good at it after a while, but at first it's extremely daunting. Like you say, I want to follow Jesus and be a priest. Well, tell me your spiritual experiences. Well, not off the top of my head can I really string those things together. So it takes you a while to do that. I'm still finding out new things and rediscovering things that I had long forgotten that are really important to my spiritual maturity, I suppose. A lot of times you'll have sort of spiritual encounters, but you won't understand what happens, what that was all about, until years and years later, and it's kind of it's a real mystery and a mystical sort of experience. So, so today I'm going to talk to you about a few pivotal spiritual experiences in my life, which led me to this moment with you here at Trinity-by-the-Cove. But first, I'm going to give you a little background. So, I was born in Winter Park, Florida, in October in the 1960s during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It scared my mother to death. She was in the hospital and had a sick baby, and all the shenanigans were going on in Cuba, which was only a missile jump away. So, technically, I am a baby boomer, but really at the very late end of the generation, when my family members used to sing pop songs like they heard on the radio, such as Going to the Chapel being a wonderful memory. That certainly wasn't my memory. I think the first song I remember hearing on the radio is I Want to Hold Your Hand. Isn't that nice? Yeah. My mother, Jean, was a lifelong Episcopalian, the only one of my forebears. She was born in Atlanta, raised in Orlando, was a homemaker and a registered nurse. She and her mother and her cousin all trained at Crawford Long Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. So I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but it was the hospital to train at the time. My grandfather was a small businessman. He owned a burglar alarm company in Orlando. He moved his family from Atlanta to Orlando during the Depression to start the company. That takes a lot of faith. As my mother told me, he had a dream one night of how to solve some technical problems regarding installation of burglar alarms and decided that Orlando was the place to move. So they did that in 1936. My father, Joseph, was born and raised in Pine Castle, which is a little town just south of Orlando. And my grandmother was a second generation born of the Braddock and Powell families that were pioneer families in Orange County. Martha Ray, my grandmother, was a homemaker, married to a highly skilled farmer, Joseph Levi Drawdy, who could raise cattle, grow citrus, and practically fix anything mechanical. He, during World War II, he was an airplane engine mechanic for the Army Air Corps, first in Orlando and then in Pensacola after that. My father tells me he knew the ins and outs of every engine in his care and could diagnose any problem by listening to how things ran. He was a fascinating man and just loved the land. So I am the middle child of my family. My brother, Michael, is 4 years older than me, and my sister is 7 years younger. She's adopted, by the way, so my mother and father decided that they wanted to have another child, and so we adopted her at the Children's Home Society in St. Petersburg, Florida. My father was an ordained Episcopal priest and served at St. Paul's, Winter Haven, where I was baptized, St. George's, Bradenton, and then St. Boniface on Siesta Key, where I was confirmed. Dad served there as associate rector and then rector. It was great fun. Life was like something out of Southern Living magazine, and Sundays were at the beach fishing and swimming, and we had a beautiful home. It was a vibrant, growing parish and a great little school to go to on Siesta Key. Had lots of family and friends. It was great. Then my life changed significantly. My parents divorced when I was 13, and the kids stayed with Mom, and Mom went back to work. And we moved to Bradenton, where I went to St. Stephen's Episcopal School and attended Christ Church. I went to college at Sewanee because I love the campus. I visited there when I was 10 years old and just could not imagine going anywhere else. It was so wonderful. The lure was strong, and I couldn't imagine going anywhere else. University of Florida sounded like hell to me. But I ended up sending 2 children to the University of Florida, so I'm now a Gator. Perhaps like many students in the 1980s, the first thought of when you're thinking about a college is where you want to go, not necessarily what you want to study. Well, that's a little bit different now. And to this day, Sewanee is my touchstone. I just love the place. It's one of those places, kind of like Canuga, you can always go back to, and it doesn't really change a whole lot, and that's a lovely thing. I always enjoyed the outdoors as a child, and I graduated from college with a degree in natural resources and worked as a water quality biologist for 13 years. I met my husband while working in Brooksville, and we had a son, Benjamin. I left the Southwest Florida Water Management District, also called SwiftMud, to work with my father. He was then an addictions counselor, and I learned a lot about alcoholism and addiction during that time with him, and about dysfunctional families too. The wonderful part was that I could take Ben to work with me. As he grew out of his morning naps, and there was a Presbyterian church around the corner that had a Mother's Morning Out program, and just like we do, they met every day there. And I would come around the corner, and Ben would take a look at where he was going, and he says, eat and play, eat and play. And so that's what it became, eat and play, for the rest of our time there. So that was a special, very special 2 years with my father, and I will tell you a little bit more about that part of my journey in just a second. So my husband was an attorney, and he was employed, he was a political appointment, more or less, and he got an appointment to the Department of not environmental management, but one of those in Tallahassee. And then we kept moving around because of changes in positions, and that happens with politics a lot. Finally, we settled in Palm Harbor, which is near Clearwater, just up the coast a little bit. And I taught high school science for about a decade. I taught environmental science, AP environmental science. I taught honors biology, and I began a program of biotechnology. And so I was able to build a lab and supply that lab and graduate our first biotech certified people out of high school, which was really very exciting. At that time, my son enlisted in the Navy, and my husband retired in 2015. I decided that 2017 was my end of the road for teaching. 10 years is a long time if you don't really feel the call to teaching. So at that time, I had discerned, I was attending All Saints in Tarpon Springs, and I had discerned that I think I've got a call to the ministry. And so about 2012, 2013, I started asking, I think I need to do this. And I talked to my priest at the time, and he said, well, let's turn in some papers to the diocese and see where this goes. So it didn't go very far at that moment because I was fairly busy teaching and I needed the income. So I had that on my list of things to do. So my husband had retired. Okay, so I moved from teaching. I wanted to become a full-time seminary student in 2017. So I just, put in the paperwork again. I said we sold our house. I was preparing to go. And I did all the right stuff for the Commission on Ministry. And they couldn't discern my call to the priesthood. Ouch, that hurt. So that was a blow, but God had really, really amazing plans for us. So while I was learning to better articulate my call with the care of a spiritual director, we ended up taking a big trip across the United States in an Airstream travel trailer, which was a lot of fun. So just a little sidebar. Anybody ever been involved in a discernment committee for somebody wanting to go to seminary, thinks that they feel that call? So when a person's in discernment to the priesthood, there's a very involved process of examination, which involves a lot of people in the church, from the parish level to the diocesan level and to the bishop. It's all very mysterious and can be extremely unnerving. But a parish puts forth somebody, like Trinity put Amy Fines forth. A committee is formed to hear your story and help you to determine and help you to articulate your call to see if there is a call to ordain ministry. That if they say yes, they send you up to the bishop's office, and then the Commission on Ministry, which is appointed people in the diocese, listen to you. It's a day of questioning, and in no way is it a rubber stamp experience. So the process includes the application, spiritual autobiography, and a bunch of interviews. Then the COM determines if the person will go to the bishop to be approved, to be named as a postulant. The postulant would go forward and go to seminary after that. And but basically from that moment, if you stay in the lines, do everything you're told to do, and if you continue to hear this call, then you will end up being ordained as a deacon or a priest. So back to the story, the personal story. Since we didn't have anything to hold us down, my husband and I decided to travel across the southern part of the country in August of 2017. Our destination was beautiful Point Mugu, California, because that's where our son was stationed. We bought a big Ford 150 and a 28-foot Airstream and set out with no plans but to enjoy our trip. It was a great experience for a while, and I thought it was a good answer for retirement. But honestly, it wasn't as glamorous or as inexpensive as I imagined. And, a lot of driving. So we also just seemed to miss more than a few natural calamities wherever we went, which I have reflected upon and am still waiting for an accurate interpretation. These included Hurricane Irma, which spawned several tornadoes in Atlanta, Georgia, and North Georgia. We escaped those by only a few hours. Of course, we're in a little silver tube. It's not like you're in a home or something, so it's pretty scary. The massive Thompson fire in California. We actually left the campground maybe 24 hours before it started. Because we were camping in Point Mugu. We got a place there. earthquake in Las Vegas, and an ice storm in Texas. So that was all within like 6 months. It was yeah. So while we traveled, I flew back to Florida for another interview with a COM and was accepted as a postulant for ordination by our diocese to the priesthood. And thank goodness. We sold the Airstream, moved to Sewanee, and there I spent the fall of 2019 through the spring of 2021. Of course, you know, COVID hit in 2020, and for almost half of my seminary experience, we were in lockdown. And it was extremely severely restricting on all of our work. We learned how to do everything on Zoom. We learned to do all sorts of liturgies, you know, through Zoom, and so you could see things. It was a fantastic experience, but not one that I would really want to do again, you know, because there were a lot of things that I was lacking in training when I came to Trinity-by-the-Cove because we couldn't meet in person. So that was kind of important, very frustrating. We even were not able to graduate in All Saints Chapel, where people from the School of Theology graduate. Usually you graduated in the chapel. Well, we ended up graduating on the football field, and that sort of felt a little weird, but it was fun, I guess. So as part of the events with COVID and seminary, my husband parted ways. It just wasn't a good fit for him, for me to be a seminarian or a priest, and it was an amicable parting. He moved back to Maine, where his family is from, and I stayed in Sewanee to finish my time in seminary. So the spring of that year, after discernment period in Trinity, and with Trinity and me, I'm here. First, I was a deacon for a week, and then I was wonderfully ordained as a priest in our beautiful church by Bishop Smith. So that's kind of the outline, the framework of my life. And so let me tell you a little bit about some spiritual experiences that led me on the way to determining that I had a call to the priesthood. So what I want to focus on now are some important unveilings on my path. You might call them divine whispers or wallops in my life that led me to the priesthood, because I did not seek the priesthood. And for most of my life, I did not see it coming whatsoever. I certainly felt comfortable in the Episcopal Church, and I could point to places in my life where God was active. I could string some of those life events together with meaning, but never thought about the priesthood whatsoever until about a decade ago. So about 2012, I think. So the first whisper I received was very real, but I didn't pay much attention to it until I wrote my spiritual autobiography as part of my discernment process. The feelings I felt during the event were amplified as I wrote the document. Unlike now, I had zero sensitivity to these type of happenings when I experienced the message. My brother confirms to me that my father was on the lookout for one of his kids with a heart for ordained ministry. I think after a while my dad saw that it might be me, but we never were able to talk about it. My father died in 2010 before I could articulate any thoughts of ordained ministry. While we sat in his office one afternoon when I was working with him, with baby Ben playing on the floor, Dad picked up his very worn Bible and read to me the rather familiar call of Isaiah. My experience wasn't a moment that shook or thundered as in the text. What happened to me was a feeling of the presence, the movement, and the soft sound of the seraph's wings in the temple. I have it here. I'll go ahead and read it for you. The year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the threshold shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, here I am, send me. Now, I didn't say at the moment, send me. I just have a memory of the movement of the seraph's wings and its body hanging in low light, then flying towards me as I heard my Father read this passage to me. I sensed time and place change. I felt the fullness of the movement of the seraph's bodies coming toward me within my head, specifically behind the bridge of my nose and in my throat. I had the same feeling many times when I read that passage. In my mind, I see the colors red, purple, and lavender. A few years later in Tallahassee, as a member of St. John's Episcopal Church, I decided to be reaffirmed. I felt that I wanted to learn more about my faith and become deeper in my beliefs. And probably like many of you who are interested in faith-seeking journey, will have that opportunity too next year. When it came time for the reaffirmation prayer and the service, I knelt before Bishop Jecko, and when he placed his hands on my head, I felt an electrical field through his fingertips, like a thin silver band about a half-inch wide encircled my head. Again, there were words that accompanied the moment. Marcella, may the Holy Spirit, who has begun a good work in you, direct and uphold you in your service of Christ and his kingdom. Amen. Again, I did not possess the spiritual sensitivity at the time to track this experience. That came later during my discernment process. One of the things I love about our diocese of Southwest Florida is its enthusiasm for Curcio, which means little course. It's a spiritual retreat of 3 days where you are immersed in teachings and experiences of the Christian life. I was called to Curcio weekend number 126 in February 2013, a little bit after I signed my papers to discern a call. The theme of the weekend was By Name I Have Called You. Several members of Trinity-by-the-Cove were there, actually. Sharon Julian, Mother Alice, Russell Tuff, were all on team. And then Marcy Cole, who I did not know at the time, was a pilgrim, as was I. Her name is Marcella, by the way. Unlike most of my spiritual experience, which is time to process, this one did not. Unlike most, I needed to complete some work before moving forward in my journey to ordained ministry. God saw the impediment in me, and he took it out. I was carrying enormous burdens in my heart. These burdens were a lodestone I pulled each day without even knowing it. Previously, I told others my transgressions, but never any lessening of my burden. It just all remained. Friends, siblings, counselors, my husband, nothing. But within this 3-day event of caring and love at Dayspring Conference Center, I was led to Mother Alice. In the rite of reconciliation, I immediately felt a freedom and a lightness not felt in so very long. My sins were wiped off, the great big transgression list. I was free. Telling a priest my most secret secrets and being reconciled to God was the door to freedom. Jesus took my heavy burden and gave me his yoke, which indeed was easy and light. The shame and hiding displaced or blocked any vision of moving forward with God. Jesus was with Alice and me in that moment. A second gift given to me was a desire to do the same for others. So, folks, my door is always open to you. As I said before, some encounters take me quite a while to articulate. Before seminary, there was one moment at All Saints in Tarpon Springs, the parish that supported me in seminary, that until recently brought me to tears each time I thought about it. It happened while waiting for the Commission on Ministry to decide my ecclesiastical fate about 5 years ago. I couldn't fully articulate the meaning of this encounter until last year. So here's the story. I was the server and altar guild member for the evening Ash Wednesday service. I had an emotional and spiritual sensitivity from the start of that service because years prior, this was the final service my father served at the altar. I remember precisely where I knelt, and I remember him handing me communion. Well, back to the story. Father Edward Henley, our interim priest and a close colleague of my father's, met me at the credence table and handed me a small crystal bowl of ashes. He mentioned for me to refresh the ashes placed on his forehead earlier in the day. I hesitated, took a big swallow, and looked into his eyes. He nodded, "Go ahead," and I had a moment with Jesus. Who, me? I am not worthy. Right at that moment, my chest felt warm and heavy. I felt Jesus' presence and recalled all the holy encounters with God's people I had experienced in that particular sanctuary of All Saints, Tarpon Springs, Florida. Red was a prominent color at that moment, and now looking back, perhaps because the sanctuary has a red carpet, but red is there. That sanctuary, that holy ground, healed my heart when it was breaking over lost relationships, personal failings, bad decisions, unfulfilled dreams, and the death of my parents. I felt as if I never wanted to leave this little piece of sacred ground behind the brass railing of the old little carpenter Gothic church. I never wanted to leave the sanctuary where I found the visage of a lion's face formed in the knots and shadows of the century-old local longleaf pine paneling. Its face turned toward the stained glass window of Jesus welcoming children, just like the one in our atrium. I never wanted to leave the sanctuary where I sat beside the bishop's chair each Sunday when I served, my left hand grasping the right arm of that chair in which sat Bishop Gray, the first bishop of Florida, on down to Bishop Hargrave, the first bishop of Southwest Florida, who confirmed me, and then to Bishop Dabney Smith, our fifth bishop. I never wanted to leave the sanctuary where we remember the gift of Jesus' sacrifice with all who love God, present and past, because I was content, joyful, and happy, and at peace all at one time. It was that encounter with Jesus where God cemented my call to the priesthood. So every Ash Wednesday is a bit of a twirl for me. It's my firm belief that these experiences were a total setup by God. After some profound introspection, I discovered that the narrative even follows the call of Isaiah. Unlike Isaiah, whose experience was in one rocking, terrifying moment, mine appeared in different chapters of my life. But I can assemble a similar story. It is a story of a sinful woman who loves liturgy, serving in the sanctuary of a church. Early in her journey, she witnesses otherworldly beings and is touched by an agent of God and cleansed of her sins. Not by a burning coal touching lips, but in a much gentler means with spoken words, "You are forgiven." She does touch the remnants of fire, however, but they are the ashes of burned palms, which at one time welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem, placing them on the priest's forehead and the sign of a cross. The Son of God reveals himself to her in the holy place that was her place of worship, and she cannot ignore the sign. "Who shall I send?" She raises her hand and she says, "Send me, but I'm going to need a lot of help." The story seems easy to conjure from this vantage point after seminary and during my first call. To reconstruct the story is akin to viewing one of those old plastic relief maps that you had in school with a side view where you can see the mountains and the valleys quite easily. With that type of map, it's easy to name the peaks in your life and string all sorts of stories together. But when you're living your life day to day, you look top down on the map, and the physical relief disappears. The landscape seems flat, and it's hard to sort through what is meaningful and what is not. So when I wrote this a little while ago, I spoke with Father Nicholas while I prepared it, and I said to him that this was a bit of a tough assignment. As I worked through the narrative, I was able to trace the thread of the story through some very painful events of my life without having to dwell in the pain. It was an amazing thing. Always the learner, I discovered that I no longer need to feel hesitant to speak about my life. Because of the invitation to tell my spiritual journey, I'm not stuck in the trace of grief or the momentary wince when recalling life events. I continue to find the thread that binds my encounters with God, however they may happen, and concentrate less on disappointments. Thank you, people of Trinity, for helping me to write this version of my story. Of course, after All Saints, I did leave the sanctuary to pursue the call to priesthood, and I stand here with you now, with a great amount of help, working with you doing priestly things, praying, teaching, studying scripture, learning liturgy, and leading worship of our God, loving Jesus, remaining open to new revelations by the Spirit. I hope I'm able to inspire you today to think about those moments, small or big, in your life, where the separation between this earthly experience and life beyond is narrowed. And you as members of Trinity are an important part of my continuing story. So let me say this about holy places on earth. Like Isaiah, we are called to worship in the church with its holy sanctuary, to gain sustenance and feel the presence of God and the love of Christ. When we leave the sanctuary and spread the gospel to the world, we take that peace and love and wisdom of the Holy Spirit with us to the people and places outside of the church grounds. Someday we will have a permanent residence in the sanctuary, partaking in praise and the heavenly banquet forever, but not now. Now we are called into relationship with God to praise Him. We are to encourage and love each other as part of a Christian community and do good works for justice and mercy and love as we live on this side of the veil, which temporarily divides us from our eternity with each other and God. Thank you for listening to my story, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yes, ma'am.
How did your son react to this?
To becoming a priest?
Yes.
He was, well, that's interesting because it was a kind of a journey. He knew that I'd be going to seminary, and he was pretty much my biggest fan. In fact, I still have a note on my refrigerator that says, "You've got this, Mom." And he had written that down when he visited me in Sewanee, and it was really, really helpful, just those few words. So when I first announced it, he goes, "Well, of course, Mom, of course." And no big deal. But it was interesting. After I was ordained, there was a bit of a change there because he saw me wearing a collar all the time. He saw what I was doing in the church. And I think it kind of changed his view of me a little bit right then and there. And because I had taken on a new persona in a way. But it's not an issue now. So I think he sees me as wiser. So yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Yes?
What was the composition of your theology group, I guess?
My seminary class? So we had a fairly small class. As far as the Master of Divinity students, but there are other degrees that you can seek at Sewanee too. Let's see, a Master of Arts, and then also like a diploma, Anglican Studies diploma, and that's or another master's degree. And then so it was about half and half, women and men. So and a lot of us, and I think about half married and half single. So, and there were mostly folks from the South, but we had a few students from up north too. So, yes. Well, as long as you want me to stay here. That's how our church works. Is that if you you sign a letter of agreement, and then like I have one for 3 years, so I'm not going anywhere for a year. My letter agreement is up in June, I believe, next year. So as long as our goals are similar, then we stay. We stay together. So it's not like other churches where they just kind of move people around. No, it's up to the church that you have, and Father Edward is in charge of all the hiring. So. Yeah, that happened in the Methodist Church too. So maybe Lutherans also. I don't know. But no, the wonderful thing about the Episcopal Church is it's a bottom-up decision-making structure in terms of that, but in terms of theology and in terms of other things, the bishop is in charge. So yeah, I'm under the tutelage of the bishop. I need to make sure that I do everything he says to do, and my vows, of course. So, but I do that in the context of a church here, and as long as I'm doing what is needed in here, then and I want to keep doing it, or I feel that's still my call, then we stay together. So, yes.
With respect to the discernment process,
Uh-huh.
you said that the first time you had the church maybe
Right.
that they determined that it was not the right fit or
Right. Yeah, right.
decision is. So, two questions about that. One is, how did you decide after that decision to
Mm-hmm.
put your name back in that? And then what changed to make them.
Right. Those are great questions. So what happened is that I went to the Commission on Ministry the first time, and this was not until like 2016. It was about that time that there's 3 areas that you interview in. One is like church life. The other one is your personal life, and then the other one is your studies. They want to know about that. So I seem to do pretty well in all these different areas, but one thing is I wasn't really up on certain liturgical things, and I was really surprised by that. A lot of times there can be personalities that make themselves known in different committees. And I think one problem is that I really did not have a good spiritual director before I went in, and so that's extremely important. Now, Amy had a very good spiritual director, and she just flew right through. I was not given a great spiritual director, and so the bishop assigned me a spiritual director who was excellent, and he was able to tease all of these stories out, and so that could show the Commission on Ministry exactly where those moments were that indicated that I should be ordained. So, and like I said, they keep things pretty quiet so they don't, it's like you don't want to let the secret out or something so people can fake it. I don't know. But so that was what happened, and the bishop really did a great job. Yeah. So, thank you for asking. Yes. That's interesting. I was in the church as a young child. Oh, by the way, my father baptized me. He baptized me when I was only a few hours old because there was a problem when I was born, and there was the thought that I wouldn't make it, so he just wanted to be sure, and he was a deacon at the time, and he went ahead and baptized me. So there was this connection between the two of us like that from the very beginning, although he did baptize all his children. And so we were at St. Boniface Church, and it was fun, and there was so much going on. It was terrific, and it was a very healthy parish, or so it seemed at the time. And then Dad ended up, my parents got divorced, my dad went off, and the problem was I didn't want anything to do with him. It really kind of threw me for a loop in terms of God and Father and all that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that I've had to work through with that. And I didn't talk to him for some 18 years. So when I say that I went to work with him and was his office manager for a couple of years, and I took my grandson to his place, that was a lot of personal growth that happened at that time. So I think just his personality, he was just always very gentle and always very easygoing when it came to that. He was always one of those people who just kind of give you things to the side. He would never, give you things head on. And so when he read that passage from Isaiah, I think he was kind of testing me a little bit. And like I said, my brother told me that he thought that I had a call, or let's put it this way, that I had the personality for it, and the level-headedness and other things that had to do with it. He could see it in me. So that was a very special time to be with him. And then he ended up having cancer, and then he lived with us, my husband and I, for about a year before he died. So that was a good time. I mean, it was a good, special time between us. So a lot of reconciliation. It's never too late to forgive. Yeah. Yes?
Your fellow seminarians, were they from the Anglican Church?
Well, that's interesting that you say only half of us were Episcopalians originally. A lot of them had come to the Episcopal Church. There are quite a few former Catholics, quite a few Baptists, no Methodists. So quite a few Baptists. My dad was raised a Baptist too, which I think is kind of interesting. So, yeah. So, all right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yay.